In the annals of modern crime, few stories are as chilling as that of the most vicious drug-dealing gang in England. They were feared, respected, and hated in equal measure. But the story of how they got started is what truly makes them a force to be reckoned with. So join us as we delve into the dark world of this notorious gang. The early years, humble beginnings of a future nightmare. Callum Byrne was just another face in the crowd, a small-time dealer trying to make ends meet in the rough streets of Liverpool. His world was one of small deals and bigger dreams. But what Callum lacked in connections, he made up for in ambition. And when an opportunity to expand his drug-dealing business presented itself, he jumped at it. This chance encounter would change everything. A casual conversation led to an offer, a proposition that held the promise of more money and more power. Callum felt the pull, the allure of a life less ordinary. So he took the leap of faith and decided to go all in. He agreed to the deal and in doing so set the wheels of fate in motion. Little did he know the kind of power he was about to unleash. The formation of an unlikely alliance. This alliance, though born out of convenience, soon turned into one of necessity. As their paths intertwined, these men found strength in numbers. They shared intelligence, resources, and manpower, forming a formidable unit that commanded respect and commanded fear. This fusion of personalities proved to be a potent mix, laying the groundwork for what would become a criminal empire. Together, they navigated the treacherous waters of the drug trade, each bringing unique skills to the table. Callum's charisma and ambition combined with the raw determination of the men he gathered around him, creating a force that was hard to ignore. The group thrived, their influence spreading like wildfire through the veins of Liverpool's underworld. Each new conquest brought them closer, forging a bond that went beyond the usual alliances. They were no longer just partners in crime. They were brothers in arms, locked in a shared journey of ambition and bloodshed. The rise of a new breed of crime boss. Callum, the mastermind behind the operation, understood that their success hinged on how they presented themselves. He wanted to be more than just another drug dealer. He aspired to become a legend. And what better way to achieve that than by cultivating an image of invincibility? With this realization dawned a new strategy, a plan to transform them from ordinary criminals to modern-day gangsters. Callum, with his innate understanding of human psychology, knew that perception was reality. So he set about crafting an image that would both fascinate and terrify the people of Liverpool. Under his guidance, they adopted a new name, one that struck fear into the hearts of their rivals and echoed respect through the alleys and clubs of Liverpool. They became known as the most ruthless drug-dealing gang in England. Their brand was cemented in the minds of the populace. And with that, their notoriety grew. A reign of terror, when blood becomes a business card. The gang's rise was marked by violence, a violence that was not random but calculated, precise, and terrifyingly effective. Their opponents never saw it coming. One moment they were strutting, the next they were lying broken and bleeding on the cold pavement. This reign of terror became their signature. It was a message to the entire city: you mess with us, you get hurt. It was a simple equation that they stuck to religiously. This tactic not only established dominance, it cultivated fear. The mere mention of the gang sent shivers down spines, making them untouchable. As their violence escalated, so did their wealth. The lucrative drug trade became their cash cow, milking the desperate addicts of Liverpool for all they were worth. Money flowed in, but so did whispers of their brutality. Tales of their violence became urban legends, passed from one awestruck listener to another. It was a morbid fascination, a horror show that people couldn't look away from. But amidst this bloody ascension, there was a shift, a subtle yet significant change in the dynamics of the group. Jealousy reared its ugly head, poisoning the very foundation of their brotherhood. Suspicions grew, accusations flew, and the cracks of mistrust began to show. Loyalty, once their strong suit, became a luxury they couldn't afford. The tight-knit unit started to fracture. Callum, the architect of their success, found himself caught in the crossfire. The men he once called brothers were now his biggest threat, plotting against him in the shadows. Betrayal, once unthinkable, became commonplace. Friendships dissolved into bitter rivalries and camaraderie turned into cutthroat competition. The unity that had been their strength was now their undoing. Their infighting didn't go unnoticed. The authorities, ever watchful, saw their disarray as a chink in their armor. They capitalized on the gang's internal squabbles, exploiting the divisions to bring them down. The net tightened, the pressure mounted, and the gang found itself cornered. The vicious cycle of violence and paranoia had taken its toll. Their bloody reign was coming to an end, the downfall of an empire. The arrest of key members sent shockwaves through the gang's hierarchy, shaking the foundations of their illegal empire. The absence of their leaders created a power vacuum, a void that was quickly filled by those with less scruples. The gang, once a well-oiled machine, started to falter. Their operations became disjointed, their violence less effective, their very essence diluted. As the heat from the authorities intensified, the remaining members scattered, going into hiding or fleeing to other cities. The life of a fugitive is never easy. On the run and on the edge, they tried to lay low, but the shadow of their former deeds followed them everywhere. Sleepless nights became the norm, and every corner looked like a potential ambush. The constant fear of capture took its toll on their mental health, haunting their dreams and tainting their days. Memories of their violent past were their only company now. The ghost of their former glory lingered, a painful reminder of what they once were. Trapped in their self-made hells, they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The intricate web of deceit, violence, and betrayal they had woven now held them captive. Their fall from grace was swift and brutal. The media, ever eager for a sensational story, gleefully chronicled their demise. Headlines blared their failures, each article adding more brick to the wall of their infamy. Public opinion turned against them. They were no longer seen as misunderstood outcasts, but as the villains they truly were. The cheers of their former fans turned into jeers, mocking their every move. It was a harsh reality check, a rude awakening that there's no honor in a life of crime. Their story became a cautionary tale, a warning for the youth of Liverpool and beyond. They were Exhibit A in the dangers of ambition unchecked. Their legacy, however, lived on in the most unlikely of places, in the hushed whispers in Liverpool's back alleys, in the nervous glances exchanged between rival gang members, and in the uneasy calm that descended upon the city. They may have been broken, but the memory of their brutality remained. Their impact on Liverpool was undeniable. They had changed the city's landscape forever. Trust had become a rare commodity, and fear had taken root in the hearts of many. They might have fallen, but their fall had reshaped Liverpool's soul in ways no one could have predicted. The aftermath, living with the legacy of fear. The cleanup process was long and arduous. The wounds they left festered, serving as constant reminders of the city's troubled past. Rebuilding trust became a Herculean task. Liverpool had to piece itself back together, brick by bloody brick. In the aftermath of such violence, healing was not just a physical process, but a psychological one too. The city grappled with trauma, trying to come to terms with the reality of such brutality on their soil. The road to recovery was paved with therapy sessions, support groups, and a collective sigh of relief. Justice, however, took a different path. Through the courts, the gang members faced trial for their crimes, but many argued that the punishment didn't fit the crime. The sentences handed down seemed too lenient, leaving many in Liverpool feeling let down by the system. The desire for retribution was palpable, but the legal system had its limits. In the end, it was the city's resilience that shone through. Despite the scars, Liverpool stood tall, determined to reclaim its identity, its culture, and its peace. Community initiatives sprung up, each aimed at pulling the city out of the darkness. Art became therapy, music became solace, and community forums became the bedrock of support. The city mourned, it healed, and it evolved. The ordeal left an indelible mark, shaping the city's character and strengthening its resolve. Liverpool emerged not just as a survivor, but as a testament to the human spirit's capacity to heal even the deepest wounds. The legacy of the most ruthless drug-dealing gang in England still echoes in the annals of modern crime, serving as a grim reminder of the depths to which human ambition and greed can sink. Their story, a chilling blend of violence, paranoia, and betrayal, stands as a cautionary tale, a warning of the destructive path that unchecked power can lead to. Despite their downfall, their impact on Liverpool remains, a haunting testament to the scars that some cities never fully recover from. Their legacy, a dark stain on the fabric of society, compels us to confront the harsh realities of the criminal underworld and the lasting trauma it inflicts on both individuals and communities. As the saying goes, once a legend, always a legend. But in the case of the most ruthless drug-dealing gang in England, their legend was one best forgotten. When Tony Schumacher stepped down from the world of crime, he left behind a legacy that was both respected and feared. His rise and fall is a study in how ambition can warp loyalty and how power can corrupt even the most trusted alliances. Tony's journey from petty criminal to the head of the feared Dodge City crew was marked by key decisions that defined not just his fate, but the fates of those around him. The first crucial moment came early in his career when he chose to align himself with the notorious Dodge City crew. This crew wasn't just known for their criminal activities, but also for their brutality. Choosing them meant accepting a life of violence, a decision that would later come back to haunt Tony. Fast forward to when Tony and his close friend Danny were arrested for a robbery. This event became a pivotal point in their relationship. While Danny decided to cooperate with the authorities, implicating Tony to secure a lighter sentence for himself, Tony remained silent, accepting the full punishment. This decision solidified their fates. Danny emerged from prison with a reduced sentence and a promise of protection, effectively becoming a police asset. Meanwhile, Tony's loyalty to his silence earned him a place in solitary confinement. It was here that he met Mickey, a seasoned criminal who would become his mentor, teaching him the intricacies of running a criminal enterprise. Upon their release from prison, Tony and Danny reunited, but their friendship was fractured. Danny's new position as a police informant placed him at odds with Tony's criminal ambitions. This conflict led to a violent confrontation, culminating in Tony killing Danny, a moment that marked his descent into full-fledged criminality. Later, Tony met Mickey's son, Sarah, who eventually became his wife. Together they built a family and a criminal empire. This dual role as husband and criminal mentor gave Mickey an immense amount of power over Tony's life, shaping his decisions and loyalties. Yet another pivotal moment came when Tony killed Mickey in self-defense during a botched robbery. This unexpected turn of events left Tony grappling with guilt and paranoia, leading him to imagine Mickey's ghost, which served as a constant reminder of his past actions. Years later, Tony's teenage son Wayne was falsely accused of armed robbery. To protect his son, Tony paid off the police, an action that had far-reaching consequences. Wayne's father was revealed to be a dangerous criminal, which put him in direct conflict with the very police force his father had bribed. Despite these challenges, Tony continued to expand his criminal empire, solidifying his power base and forming alliances with other criminals. However, his decisions often had unforeseen consequences, such as the escalation of violence with rival gangs, which resulted in bloodshed and destruction. Furthermore, Tony's association with corrupt police officers like DCI Ken Stott provided him with protection and intelligence, allowing him to operate more efficiently and evade law enforcement. However, this alliance also exposed him to the moral complexities of the criminal justice system, blurring the lines between right and wrong. Throughout his criminal career, Tony maintained a complex relationship with Detective Inspector John Bishop, who represented both an obstacle and a challenge for Tony. As the primary investigator in many of the cases against Tony, Bishop symbolized the law enforcement apparatus that Tony constantly had to evade. However, their adversarial relationship also developed into a grudging respect as Bishop came to recognize Tony's intelligence and capabilities. As Tony's empire grew, so did his inner circle, with trusted associates like Finn and Claude providing him with support and expertise. These relationships allowed Tony to delegate tasks and expand his criminal activities, but also created a power structure that could be manipulated and exploited. However, despite his success, Tony's conscience began to bother him, leading to moments of introspection and guilt. He grappled with the consequences of his actions and the toll they took on innocent lives. This internal conflict added a layer of complexity to his character, showcasing the psychological burden of a life of crime. One of the most pivotal moments in Tony's criminal career was his decision to kidnap and blackmail a wealthy businessman named Victor Meacham. This high-stakes crime brought Tony face to face with the dangers of targeting the city's elite and the lengths to which they would go to protect their interests. In response to the threat posed by Tony, the city's businessmen formed an alliance with the police, creating a formidable opposition that Tony had to contend with. This external pressure forced Tony to adapt and devise strategies to counter the investigation while staying one step ahead of the law. As the series progresses, the stakes continue to rise, leading to a final confrontation between Tony and the forces aligned against him. This culmination of events tested not only his criminal skills, but also the strength of his alliances and the depth of his resolve. One of the defining aspects of Tony's criminal career is his ability to navigate the intricate world of organized crime. He expertly balances alliances and rivalries, always seeking to maintain an advantage over his competitors. This aspect of the series explores the complexities of power dynamics within criminal organizations. Moreover, the series delves into the psychology of organized crime, examining how individuals like Tony rationalize their actions and cope with the moral implications of their choices. His internal struggles provide a humanizing portrayal of a criminal mastermind. Another intriguing element of the series is the cat-and-mouse game between Tony and the police. Detective Inspector John Bishop represents the unwavering pursuit of justice as he relentlessly investigates Tony's crimes and closes in on bringing him to justice. This dynamic creates a constant sense of tension and keeps viewers on the edge of their seats. As the series reaches its climax, the lines between right and wrong become blurred. Tony's actions, while morally reprehensible, are sometimes portrayed in a way that evokes sympathy or understanding. This complexity challenges viewers to question their perceptions of justice and morality. Furthermore, the series showcases the dark underbelly of a seemingly respectable city, exposing the hidden world of crime and corruption that exists beneath the surface. The portrayal of Liverpool as a backdrop for Tony's criminal activities adds a layer of realism and intrigue to the narrative. In conclusion, The Downfall of the Dodge City Crew is a gripping exploration of ambition, betrayal, and the corrosive effects of power. Through the character of Tony Schumacher, the series offers a compelling study of a man who, driven by his choices, becomes entangled in a web of deceit, violence, and ultimately his own demise.
The more powerful the gang became, the more fragile their unity grew. From the outside, they looked unstoppable, an untouchable crew that had turned Liverpool's underworld into their personal empire. But behind the walls of secrecy and blood, cracks were forming. Paranoia crept in slowly at first, a whisper that someone might be working with police, a suspicion that someone had taken more money than he was owed. In a world where trust was rare and betrayal meant death, even the smallest doubts carried lethal weight. The first sign of trouble came when one of the original members went missing. He was not just an associate. He had been part of the group from the beginning, one of the boys who had grown up with the rest of them on the estates near the docks. His disappearance sent ripples of unease through the gang. Days later, his body surfaced in a canal, weighed down with chains. Rumors spread that he had been caught meeting with detectives, though no one knew for certain. The killing was not done with their usual professionalism. It was messy, rushed, almost desperate. For the first time, it seemed their violence had turned inward. Not long after, another man was found dead in an abandoned industrial estate, a bullet in the back of his head. Again, whispers suggested he had been suspected of talking too much, perhaps about money, perhaps about jobs. The message was clear. Loyalty meant nothing if suspicion fell on your name. Every member of the crew began watching his back, not just against rivals and police, but against his own brothers. This internal bloodshed unsettled the balance of the gang. Their once tight-knit unit now moved with caution around each other. Conversations grew shorter, eyes lingered too long, and silence became the only safety. Paranoia didn't just live in their minds, it shaped their actions. Meetings became secretive. Fewer people were trusted with sensitive details, and the circle of decision-makers shrank. With every death inside their own ranks, the crew became both more dangerous and more unstable. Law enforcement took notice. For years, the gang had been nearly impossible to penetrate. Now, detectives saw an opening. The paranoia that was ripping them apart could also weaken their discipline. Secret surveillance teams began following them more aggressively, listening in on their phone calls, planting cameras near their known hangouts. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a crew that was no longer as united or as careful as before. But the gang didn't collapse easily. They doubled down on their work, carrying out hits with the same efficiency as always, as if killing rivals could silence the doubts eating away at them. If anything, their violence increased. People connected to the police, suspected informants, and even minor figures in the drug trade began turning up dead to outsiders. It looked like a ruthless display of dominance. To those inside, it was a desperate attempt to maintain control. The tension grew worse when money came into question. The crew had always operated on a system of trust among its top tier, but whispers of skimming began to surface. Drug shipments went missing. Payments from contracts weren't fully accounted for. No one could prove who was responsible, but suspicion was enough. Arguments turned into threats, threats into plans, and soon the bloodshed inside the gang overshadowed their war with outsiders. One particularly chilling moment came when a senior member simply vanished. His car was found abandoned on a quiet road, keys still in the ignition. His family reported him missing, but within the gang, there were no questions asked. Everyone knew what had happened, even if no body was ever found. The silence around his disappearance spoke louder than words. These killings created an atmosphere where no one felt safe. The men who once laughed together, who once shared their spoils and celebrated their victories, now kept their distance. Every move was measured, every glance calculated. A crew that had risen on trust and shared ambition was now drowning in suspicion. Detectives working on the case saw the opportunity, but still struggled with the same obstacle as always, fear. Even those inside the gang who might have considered turning informant knew the cost would be their lives. The crew had proven time and time again that betrayal would be met with swift execution. Yet the paranoia inside the gang meant that people were dying anyway, whether guilty or not. To the police, it was only a matter of time before someone decided that cooperating was the only way to survive. Meanwhile, the gang's outward operations began to show cracks. Jobs that once carried their trademark precision became sloppier. Mistakes were made. A hitman left behind evidence. A weapon was recovered that could be traced. These were errors that would have been unthinkable in their prime. But the fear of each other was making them reckless. Members rushed jobs, skipped precautions, and made choices driven by paranoia instead of calculation. The city noticed the shift too. Where once the crew's violence had been sharp and surgical, now it seemed chaotic. Bodies turned up not just of rivals, but of men rumored to have been close to the crew. Whispers spread across Liverpool's estates that the killers from the docks were losing control. And in a world built on reputation, even the suggestion of weakness was dangerous. Rival groups, long silent under their rule, began to circle again, sensing the possibility of striking back. Despite the bloodshed, the crew still held immense power. Businesses continued to pay protection money. Contracts still came in from other cities. Drugs still flowed through their networks. But the aura of invincibility that had made them untouchable was beginning to fade. And once a gang shows weakness, the vultures of both law enforcement and rival criminals close in. For the men at the top, the greatest threat was no longer the police or their rivals. It was each other. Every handshake, every meeting, every shared drink carried a question. Was this the moment the knife came out? They had built an empire on fear, but now they lived under the same shadow they'd cast over everyone else. The seeds of their downfall had been planted, not by the hands of rivals or detectives, but by their own paranoia. And as the cycle of violence turned inward, their empire, once so feared and untouchable, was beginning to devour itself.
They had turned Liverpool's underworld into their own personal empire, a vast network of fear and respect that stretched from the seedy bars of the docks to the grand estates overlooking the Mersey. For years, they had managed to evade the grasp of the law, their grip on the city's criminal trade unchallenged, their ruthlessness spoken of in hushed tones across Europe. But empires, even those built on fear and bloodshed, have a way of crumbling from within. What the crew didn't know was that right under their noses, a different kind of game was being played, one that threatened to tear their empire apart and bring their reign to a brutal end. It started subtly, a sense of unease that crept into the crew's inner circle, a feeling that someone among them might be playing both sides. The question wasn't who, but how could any one of them be trusted? This paranoia seeped into their relationships, their business dealings, their very survival. They became prisoners of their own success, trapped in a world where enemies were everywhere and shadows held secrets. The truth was, they were being watched, not by the police or rival gangs, but by their own. Each member of the crew was now a suspect, a potential target, a possible mole. This constant state of alertness, this gnawing suspicion ate away at their carefully constructed order, creating rifts, fueling arguments, and turning allies into adversaries. As their empire grew, so did the list of potential enemies. But now their biggest threat wasn't the police or rival gangs. It was the uncertainty that clung to their own members, casting long shadows that could destroy everything they had built. Each new piece of intelligence, every bit of rumor, every overheard conversation became fodder for their suspicions. Any slip, any mistake, any perceived slight could tip the balance, creating a domino effect that could bring the whole structure crashing down. This paranoid environment created a breeding ground for distrust. Longtime allies questioned each other's loyalty. Old friends examined each other's pasts, searching for clues that could justify their fears. Second-guessing became the norm. Secrets held as currency, and silence was a sign of guilt. One of the most devastating aspects of this paranoia was that it turned the crew's strength against them. Their numbers, once a symbol of their power, became a liability. More members meant more potential suspects, more sources of leaks, more opportunities for betrayal. Their size, which had allowed them to operate efficiently and expand their reach, now threatened to engulf them in a web of deceit and doubt. In such an atmosphere, communication ceased to be a tool for coordination and became a minefield of hidden meanings. Messages were decoded for double meanings. Words carried the weight of unspoken accusations. Even the most mundane exchanges became charged with tension. The crew was falling apart at the seams, unable to function as a cohesive unit because the very idea of unity was now questionable. Meetings, once productive sessions of strategizing and planning, degenerated into tense standoffs. Every voice was scrutinized, every opinion challenged, every statement dissected. The ability to make quick decisions, which had been the hallmark of their success, was lost. Paralyzed by the fear of exposure, they became indecisive, struggling to agree on the simplest of tasks. The paranoia also seeped into their operational procedures. Every move, no matter how routine, was second-guessed. Plans were redone, routes were changed, schedules were altered. Nothing was too small to escape scrutiny. This level of micromanagement, born out of fear rather than strategy, disrupted the flow of their activities, creating bottlenecks that slowed their operations and introduced new risks. Their empire, once a beacon of control and power in Liverpool's underworld, was now besieged by a different kind of adversary, one that wore the same faces as their own. Betrayal was a shadow that followed them, a constant threat that lurked in every interaction. Trust, once the cornerstone of their relationships, became a luxury they could no longer afford. In this climate of suspicion, loyalty became the ultimate currency, but it was a currency that could only be spent in hypothetical situations. Each member lived in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for the moment when they could prove their loyalty by turning on another. However, such opportunities rarely presented themselves. Maintaining their empire required a delicate balance of power, influence, and respect. But as their paranoia intensified, they began to lose all three. Their reputation for ruthlessness and control started to falter. Rivals began to test their boundaries, sensing weakness. Allies questioned their reliability. And potential new recruits hesitated before committing themselves. In the criminal world, as in any other, reputation is everything. And the crew's reputation was taking a beating. Their inability to deal with the paranoia effectively was becoming common knowledge. Rumors spread through the city's underworld like ripples in a pond, reaching far and wide, attracting unwanted attention. The police, ever vigilant, were paying close attention to these developments. They recognized that a divided crew was an opportunity, a chance to break the hold that the gang had on Liverpool. They increased surveillance, gathering intelligence, looking for ways to exploit the disarray. As the crew fractured, the police moved in, taking advantage of the chaos, exploiting the divisions. Arrests began to mount. Key members were taken off the streets, and the crew's ability to function as a cohesive unit was severely compromised. Meanwhile, rival gangs, sensing weakness, started making moves of their own. They tested the crew's defenses, probing for vulnerabilities, launching small attacks to show that they were still a force to be reckoned with. As the crew stumbled, their rivals pressed their advantage. Violent clashes erupted, claiming lives on both sides. But it was a violence without purpose, a desperate attempt to maintain control in a world that was rapidly slipping away from them. Yet the crew refused to go down without a fight. Despite their internal struggles, they still possessed the skills, the ruthlessness, and the resources to defend their turf. Hits were ordered, threats were made, and violence continued to grip the city. But these acts of violence, while vicious and effective, were increasingly futile. They were those of a cornered animal, a last-ditch attempt to hold on to power in the face of overwhelming odds. The true cost of their paranoia was becoming evident. Their empire, once formidable and respected, was now a shadow of its former self. Their wealth and influence were diminished. Their operations were crippled, and their reputation was in tatters. They had fought against the police, against rival gangs, and against each other. But it was their own paranoia that had dealt the most fatal blow. It was the invisible enemy that had sapped their strength, eroded their unity, and ultimately brought their reign to an end. Their story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that in the relentless world of organized crime, trust is a rare commodity and paranoia can be a deadly master. As their empire crumbled, they were left with nothing but their weapons, their grudges and their fears, trapped in a downward spiral of their own making. And so the legend of the crew, once whispered with awe and respect, faded into the annals of Liverpool's history, replaced by tales of their final, more tragic days. Liverpool, England. The beginning of the end came not with police raids or rival ambush, but with greed. The crew had built its empire on blood and fear, but money had always been at its core, and it was money that finally tore them apart. A shipment of cocaine worth millions was smuggled in from Spain, a deal that should have cemented their power for years to come. But when the drugs arrived in Liverpool, part of the shipment vanished. Fingers were pointed, excuses were made, and soon one of the members was accused of skimming his share. In their world, such an accusation was not a dispute to be settled, it was a death sentence. The man at the center of the betrayal was dragged into a safe house on the outskirts of the city. What followed was not the calculated efficiency the crew was known for, but raw, brutal vengeance. He was beaten and tortured for hours before being executed. His body was buried hastily in a shallow grave, but the job was sloppy. Detectives had already been watching the crew closely, and within weeks, intelligence reached them about the killing. For the first time, law enforcement had more than rumors and whispers, they had leads. While the gang thought they had erased a traitor, they had actually opened the door for the police. Unknown to them, hidden surveillance was already capturing conversations and movements. Listening devices planted in cars and meeting spots recorded discussions about money, drugs, and murder. Detectives had waited patiently for years, knowing the crew's arrogance would eventually cause mistakes. Now the evidence was beginning to stack up. The paranoia inside the gang only grew worse after the killing. Everyone suspected everyone else. Meetings became tense, with men keeping hands close to weapons and eyes darting across the room. The trust that had once bound them was gone completely. They still carried out contracts, still moved drugs, but each job was done under the shadow of suspicion. Their empire was still standing, but it was rotting from the inside, and the stench of weakness began to spread across the city. Rival gangs noticed first. Small-time dealers who had once fled from their name began testing boundaries again. Corners once tightly controlled saw new faces selling drugs. Whispers spread that the dockside killers were slipping, that they were too busy turning on each other to keep their grip on the streets. And for the first time in years, people dared to question their dominance. The police struck at the moment when the gang was at its weakest. Early morning raids were coordinated across Liverpool, smashing down doors and dragging men from their beds. Cars, houses, and safe locations were searched, yielding weapons, drugs, and traces of evidence that connected them to years of killings. Some of the arrests went smoothly, but others erupted in chaos. Shootouts broke out in narrow streets. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as heavily armed officers swarmed the estates. And the city woke up to the reality that the monsters who had haunted them for so long were finally being dragged into the light. The trials that followed became some of the most shocking in Liverpool's history. For years, families of victims had lived without answers, haunted by the violence that had stolen their sons, brothers, and fathers. Now, inside the courtroom, the truth came out piece by piece. Former associates who had once stayed silent took the stand in exchange for protection. Their testimonies painted a picture of a gang that had begun as petty criminals but had grown into a network of contract killers responsible for dozens of deaths. Jurors listened in silence as details of the murders were read aloud. Photographs, forensic reports, and intercepted conversations laid bare the brutality of the crew. Executions in cars, beatings in warehouses, bodies dumped in canals, the full scope of their terror shocked even hardened detectives who had spent decades investigating violent crime. Each revelation chipped away at the myth of their invincibility. The men who once strutted through the streets untouchable now sat in the dock, chained by their own arrogance and greed. Some of the leaders received life sentences, convicted of multiple murders. Others were locked away for drug trafficking, weapons charges, and conspiracy, but not all of them faced justice. A handful vanished before the raids, slipping out of the country with forged passports and hidden cash. They became ghosts, their names whispered but their faces never seen again. Whether they lived quietly abroad or continued their work in other countries, no one knew. Liverpool, though relieved, was left scarred. The reign of the dockside crew had changed the city. For years, fear had dictated daily life. Businesses had paid protection without question. Families had buried loved ones without answers. Even those untouched directly by the violence had lived under its shadow, shaping how they moved, where they went, and what they dared to say. The arrests ended the terror, but they could not erase the memories. The legacy of the gang became a cautionary tale. They had started as small-time dealers, no different from dozens of others across the estates. But their willingness to embrace violence had transformed them into something far deadlier. They had discovered that fear could be more profitable than drugs, and that reputation could kill more effectively than bullets. For a time, they had controlled not just streets but entire communities. But in the end, the very violence that built their empire also destroyed it. Police officers who had spent years chasing them admitted that, without the internal betrayal, the crew might have continued for much longer. Their discipline, their secrecy, and their calculated methods had made them almost impossible to catch. But once suspicion infected them, mistakes followed. Betrayal led to murder, murder led to evidence, and evidence finally led to convictions. For the city of Liverpool, the fall of the gang was both a relief and a warning. It proved that no matter how powerful or feared a criminal organization becomes, greed and paranoia can unravel it from within. It also showed how quickly ordinary young men, raised in poverty and hardened by the streets, could transform into the most feared killers in the country. In the end, their story was one of ambition turned monstrous, loyalty turned fragile, and power turned toxic. They had once believed they were untouchable, but their empire, built on fear and blood, collapsed under the weight of its own violence. Liverpool would never forget them, not because of the drugs they sold or the money they made, but because of the terror they unleashed and the lives they destroyed in their rise to become the deadliest hit crew the city had ever known.